Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. With just over a month until the election and all 201 state legislative seats up for grabs, it's time for voters to decide which direction the state of Minnesota will head next. Joining me in the studio to talk about his caucus's efforts to take back the Senate majority is the current Senate Republican leader, David Hann. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you.
Your caucus would like to take control of the Senate, and you need 6 seats to do so. What is your message to voters?
Well, I think, first of all, the Democrats have really been the majority party in the Senate for most of the last 45 years. So we think we need a change in direction. What we've seen in the last several years with Democrat control is we've seen higher taxes. We've certainly seen a greater accelerated pace of state spending, but we haven't seen results. I think the biggest issue that we see and what we hear about is about health care, that this was an idea that the Democrats in this state and nationally pushed to try to improve our health care system, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked at all. It's made it worse. And we think that is a top priority. We need to make sure that we do things to restore a strong insurance market and see those health care insurance premiums go down, and that people have more access to providers, which has been diminished with this so-called reform. So that is a top concern that we have. We also are very concerned about the economy, with the high taxes and the regulations and these policies actually chasing people out of our state. We need to attract people to Minnesota. We want them to come, invest, build businesses, stay here, and we're chasing people away instead of attracting them to Minnesota. So those are 2 of the top concerns that we have. We want patient-centered health care, and we also want, by the way, student-centered education. And this is another one of the things that we think that the Democrats have failed in their leadership. They've spent a lot of money, but we have not seen any improvement in the achievement gap. We still have the worst record of all the states in the country on how well we educate kids that arguably are most in need of an education. We think we've got ideas on both those things to make it better.
Very little was accomplished in the last legislative session. There was no bonding bill, no tax bill, no transportation funding. What do you say to voters that are getting fed up with the partisan gridlock?
Well, I think in this case, this most recent year, the difficulty was a governor who vetoed a tax bill that he promised he wouldn't veto, and a Senate Democrat majority that torpedoed a bonding transportation package that passed by a very wide bipartisan margin in the House. And I think for political purposes, they decided to add an amendment that, in effect, ruined that opportunity for that bill to pass. So I think to the extent that people are frustrated with the results this year, I think you have to look at the Senate Democrat majority as a big part of why we had that problem. So I think most things that we deal with in the legislature, you probably know this, I hope the listeners or viewers know it as well, most of the things that we do are done in a very bipartisan way. There's no question. There are a few things that are kind of flashpoints, if you will, that really highlight the differences. Things like gas taxes, for example. Democrats think that we need to spend more money on transportation. Republicans believe we need to do the same thing, but the approach to doing it is very different. We think we have sufficient funds if we prioritize our spending. Democrats are saying, no, let's raise let's make our gas tax one of the highest in the country. We don't think we need to do that. So there are differences that are hard to find compromises on. Something like a gas tax, it's either on or off. You're either for it or against it. But those are things that do get a lot of attention. And frankly, we need to ask the public, what is your preference? Do you need more taxes on the economy, or can we take the money that we have and prioritize it more effectively?
Now, you mentioned it a little bit earlier about health care, and the GOP has been really critical of MNsure. Rates are coming out tomorrow, but what are some key points of your plan, and what would your party do differently?
Well, there's a couple of things. One thing, for example, when this was all happening, Republicans offered suggestions. They were all turned away. This was a completely partisan effort on the part of Democrats to say, we know how to do this. We are going to do it. We don't need your help, Republicans. And they did what they did. And it has turned out to be a disaster. We've had hundreds of thousands of people lose their insurance. We've had insurers decide they can't survive in the marketplace. They have left the marketplace. People have lost their providers. And insurance premiums, instead of the promised reduction, which is what Democrats said they'd see, they have gone up at an alarming pace and are scheduled to go up again, I think even more. So what we think we can do is we can do some things to restore the marketplace. One thing, for example, is to bring back the high-risk pool. Minnesota was a leader in this and had been for decades. We had a high-risk pool that guaranteed insurance for anybody, regardless of what condition they may have had. And that worked very well. And one thing it did do is it kept the non-high risk, if you will, customers in a pool that was affordable. We think we can restore that, and that is one of the things that we will do.
Okay. There was an article in the Pioneer Press. There have also been other articles about the sheer amount of money, outside money, coming into these Minnesota legislative races. Some races could exceed $1 million. Is control of the legislature warranting this much money being spent? Are the stakes this high?
Well, you know, I think there's always going to be money spent in political races. There is a lot of money more spent now than there was maybe a decade or two ago, but everything has gotten more expensive. So I don't think it's a bad thing to recognize that you need to spend money to win elections, but it's not the only thing that makes the decision in people's minds. A lot of it is candidates, and a lot of it is sort of intangible things, but money is a part of it. But I think that what it signals is that there is great frustration at the national level what the federal government is doing, and I think there's a recognition that the state governments are really where there needs to be some reform. I think there needs to be a recognition that states have the ability and should have the ability to manage their affairs. That's been our message as Republicans, that we want to stop turning over all the decision makings on things like education or healthcare or even transportation to a federal government. That's not their role. We should do that here in Minnesota. So I think the recognition of the role that states play is getting maybe a little more heightened, and that may be part of the interest.
Thank you so much for coming by today.
Thanks for having me.